going to go ahead and get started. I was going to try and work 529 first, but seeing the large number of opponents, neutrals, and proponents, we will probably hold off on that. Watch your electronic calendar because we do have a possible meeting on Monday. We'll let you know. We'll update that later today. With that, we'll turn our attention to the hearing on 546. Adam, can you give us a briefing?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you great.
All right. Very good. Senate Bill 546 would regulate the use of autonomous motor vehicles. Included in the bill, I'll go through it quickly. Section 1 of the bill provides a definition section for various terms used throughout the bill. Section 2 would grant driverless capable vehicles, which is a defined term in the bill, the ability to operate without a human driver if the vehicle is capable of achieving a minimal risk condition, the vehicle is capable of operating in compliance with applicable traffic and motor vehicle safety laws and regulations of the state, the vehicle bears the required manufacturer's certification label, and a conventional human driver was present in the vehicle for 1 year for the entity that places such vehicles into service in the state. Owners of driverless capable vehicles are required to submit to law enforcement an interaction plan with the Department of Transportation. So essentially they'd have to submit this plan to ks.gov that would contain the following information: how to communicate with a fleet support specialist who is available during the times such vehicles would be in operation, how to quickly remove the driverless capable vehicle from the roadway, and steps to safely tow the vehicle, how to recognize whether the driverless capable vehicle is in autonomous mode, and any additional information the manufacturer owner deems necessary regarding hazardous conditions or public safety risks associated with the operation of a driverless capable vehicle. The bill, Section 2, would also require that if a conventional human driver is present in a driverless capable vehicle, such person shall possess a valid driver's license and shall be subject to the insurance requirements as provided by law. Moving on, Section 3 of the bill would require the owner of an ADS equipped vehicle to obtain financial security or insurance prior to operating in the state for the vehicles. Section 4 would establish the requirements for a driverless capable vehicle in the event of an accident. Such vehicles are required to promptly contact law enforcement to report the accident and also alert law enforcement or emergency services and remain at the scene or the immediate vicinity of the crash until law enforcement arrives or vehicle registration and insurance information is provided to the parties affected by the accident. Section 5 would allow for the operation of an on-demand driverless capable vehicle that can be used to transport persons or goods. Section 6 would establish that an automated driving system and an ADS equipped vehicle shall be subject to applicable traffic and motor safety laws. KDOT would have the sole authority to regulate these driving systems and vehicles. And then political subdivisions are prohibited from imposing additional requirements or taxes on ADS equipped vehicles. This would not include the normal traffic laws those vehicles would be subject to. Section 7 would require driverless capable vehicles to be properly registered and titled under Kansas law. Section 8 would allow for the operation of a driverless capable vehicle as a commercial motor vehicle. Section 9 would establish that the Uniform Act regulating traffic on highways, which is kind of the name of the general acts covering traffic regulations in the state, would apply to the extent practical for a driverless capable vehicle. Section 10 would establish an autonomous vehicle advisory committee. This committee is made up of various members listed in Section 10, and they would have to submit a report to the legislature on or before July 1 of 2023 with recommendations regarding the use or regulation of autonomous motor vehicles in the state. Then Section 11 would amend a current statute 8-2106, and it goes through how a law enforcement would deliver a written citation for a traffic citation when there would not be a driver in a driverless capable vehicle. And such citation would be delivered by mail to the certified owner of the vehicle. And then lastly, section 2 would just amend the current provision law that these new sections would be part of the Uniform Act regulating traffic on highways, kind of a technical change. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Committee questions for Adam?
I have one, Mr. Chairman.
Continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you tell me who the 10-member committee is? I'm sorry, I don't have a copy of that balloon in front of me.
Sure, happy to. It is 2 members of the Senate appointed by the president, 1 member of the Senate appointed by the minority leader, 2 members of the House appointed by the Speaker, 1 member appointed by the minority leader in the House, the Director of Vehicles or a designee, Secretary of Transportation or a designee, the Superintendent of the Highway Patrol or a designee, 2 members appointed by the Governor from labor organizations, and 2 members appointed by the Governor from the autonomous vehicle industry.
Okay, thank you. And one other question. Are we going to have any comments from the Secretary of Transportation, Mr. Chairman, or where I could wait to ask that question, or is that something I should direct to Adam?
She is scheduled to testify, and her chief counsel is present in the room.
Oh, good. I'll wait on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, 1 question or 3 questions for Adam.
Go ahead.
Just to make sure. Adam, first I want to, is there a definition at section 1 or 2? I think it was 2. You said something about minimal risk. Is there a definition about what minimal risk means?
There is. It's on page 1 of the bill, starting on line 31. A minimal risk condition means a reasonably safe state to which an automated driving system brings an ADS-equipped vehicle upon experience a performance-relevant failure of the system that renders the system unable to perform the entire dynamic driving task, including but not limited to removing the vehicle to the nearest shoulder if the vehicle is capable of doing so, bringing the vehicle to a complete stop, and activating the vehicle's emergency signal lamps.
And then just to be clear, there's nothing about the record of the company or the vehicles in terms of how many accidents or anything like that's inside of that, right? It's mainly talking about the functionality of the actual vehicle.
I would believe, yes, that would be correct.
Okay, and then second question, I want to be clear that there is no weight limit in this, right? We have it kind of wide open in the current version.
That is correct. There's currently not a maximum amount. That is true.
Thanks. And then third one was, I just got 2 more questions. Third one was when we have a year-long requirement for the entity operating the vehicles for a driver to be present, does that mean that every vehicle needs to have a driver present during that first year? And is there a minimum number of times that vehicle has to have ridden on the roads? So could, for example, somebody have a driverless vehicle with a passenger or a person in it riding along for 1 time out of that year and then be qualified, or is there some kind of minimal number of trips?
Currently, there is not any sort of minimum number of trips. My interpretation of that is just if a company is going to operate in the state for the first year, every vehicle they put in operation would have to have a driver. Then after that year expires, any vehicle would not be required to have an individual, but there's not like a minimum or testing amount or, certain threshold that they would have to get to for number of trips before that would expire.
And then the last question is just to be absolutely clear. When you're talking about local political subdivisions, that carries over in the specific example, cities and counties would not be able to put additional regulations or stipulations on autonomous vehicles just because they're autonomous vehicles operating in their domain, right?
That is correct.
Thanks. All right, thanks.
Committee, further questions for Adam?
I have one, Mr. Chairman.
Continue.
Thank you. Is there a limit in terms of the number of companies that could participate in this during this year time? And I can't remember in 2023, when that year is up. If you could reiterate, Adam, when that year pilot period is up.
Senator, no, there's not a threshold of number. It doesn't set a maximum a number of companies that can operate. Essentially, for any company that comes into the state, whether or not it's today, tomorrow, a year from now, is how the bill is drafted. They would have to operate with humans in their cars for that first year that they're in operation in the state. But there is no threshold number of companies that are allowed to operate. It's essentially unlimited at this point.
And is there a process where they notify some official authority, such as Secretary of KDOT, that they're going to be part of this pilot for this year?
They're required to submit their hold up real quick. They're required to submit to KDOT their law enforcement interaction plan. So that's about the only approval that I can see in the bill that would, kind of oversight, that other than just general oversight to KDOT of the equipment. That's truly the only interaction I know of in the bill that definitely deems KDOT to have control over them, or, at least to be able to see their interaction plan. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of the only control mechanism I can kind of see in the bill right now.
So there's, they have to submit that plan, but it doesn't have to be approved.
Yeah, I believe it really just says they have to submit it.
They just have to submit it, okay. And then I maybe wasn't listening. What date does this pilot start and end?
It's not really. It essentially goes into effect when the bill goes into effect. So July 1 of this year, and there really is not an end date. It would just go on indefinitely, just allowing the operation of these vehicles.
So if we had 10 companies that wanted to do this, and one started July 1 when the bill goes into effect, they would have till June 30th of the next year. And if another company wanted to start it on August 1, they would have until essentially July 31 the next year, et cetera. There could be any number that would have a year to do this.
The year essentially, Senator, just requires them to have individuals in their cars, so they wouldn't be a driverless vehicle. After that year, the bill would allow them to become vehicles to be driverless. So it's not really a pilot, I would say. It's more of just a period that requires humans in cars.
So as long as this bill was in effect, over the next 20 years, we could have a company come in and have a year to do this.
They would just, for their first year in operation, yes, have to be required to have humans in their cars.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you for that clarification, Adam. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hawk, a further clarification might be that the advisory committee has to have a report in by July 1st, 2023. Hopefully we would have had an operational in here and seen how things are going so we could get a good report and see what kind of changes we need to make. I think there'll be further proponent testimony and neutral testimony that'll clear some of that up. With that committee seeing no further questions, we'll turn to our proponents. First up, we have Sandy Braden, committee note in your package, or if you're online, it would be Leighton Yates. I do not know if this one got scanned in on the PDF though. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to appear in support of Senate Bill 546 as written. And as you know, Leighton Yates has been giving you testimony in the past. He was not available this morning, so I will go over briefly what some of the issues that we have come to an agreement with. And the bill in its current form reflects countless conversations, emails, and red lines, but is still a work in progress and will remain committed to working with a group of stakeholders to find compromise language and workable solutions. We really appreciate the sponsor, chair, reviser, and stakeholders' efforts to find a bill that will work for everyone. We really appreciate the opportunity to have all the definitions kind of be standardized so that helps across from state to state line. And there were concerns regarding law enforcement interaction, and the bill now provides steps and information to address stakeholder concerns. And there is additional language that has been given to the revisor in regard to law enforcement issues. And some of the issues that we did address were to make sure that these AVs would adhere to current laws, adhering to speed limits, traffic lights, stop signs, the use of blinking signals when changing lanes, registration and titling, holding insurance coverage, and reporting of collisions. This bill allows levels 3 to 5 AVs to operate in the state. There is a requirement for a safety driver in the driverless capable vehicle for a year for any vehicle placed into service. We suggest the clock on this should start from the beginning of the technology placed into service in the state at a minimum. And I think that was discussed, that it's not from the date. You have to have a driver from July 1 to the next year. It's when the technology is deployed in that particular vehicle in that area. And the advisory committee is created to further engage stakeholders within the state and industry. We might also recommend that it become a little less heavy on the legislators and more on an advisory capacity, where we bring in more of the industry, more of the regulators, more of those folks that are going to be responsible from the day-to-day, like city, counties, et cetera, and that they could give a report to the legislators, and then the legislators could take a look and from that report to see how things are going, and then make their recommendations from that standpoint. And as we know, this should be an ongoing, evolving process, and maybe extend the advisory council from a year to 3 to 5 years, because this is going to be evolving over time, no matter how you look at it. And we expect further engagement with the committee, the agencies, and other stakeholders within the state, and remain focused on shaping the bill into one that provides consistency with surrounding state laws. Safety is a top priority for automakers and a primary goal for the development of the ADS-equipped vehicles. We appreciate the opportunity and look forward to further conversations. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Committee, I think we're going to hold questions till the end of the proponents. Thank you, Sandy. Next
you.
up, we have Mike O'Neill, representing Walmart, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. Mike O'Neill, representing Walmart. I'm going to be fairly brief because this committee has already heard us a little bit earlier on the subject of autonomous vehicles, and I just want to repeat kind of what brought us here, and that is the fact that Kansas basically is one of the last 6 states that has not yet addressed in state law or policy autonomous vehicles, and we would like very much for Kansas to join the 43 other states that have autonomous vehicle policy. As you know, we have a partnership with GATIC. That partnership has been successfully deployed in Louisiana and Arkansas, and we are fully ready to implement that technology in Kansas, pending authority through legislation. And so primarily what we're trying to accomplish here is to get Kansas on board with AV policy, because that's certainly the trend in the country. Kansas being centrally located, we know that there's going to be a lot of growth in this area. Our prime objective is to get it right and to have it be legislation that is fairly uniform with other states that have addressed this issue. And so that's why we have continued to work out through this session with all the stakeholders and players to try to get as close as we can to some uniform language. Safety being the primary concern, we want to work very closely with law enforcement. We want to work very closely with the legislature and KDOT to make sure that all the boxes are checked and there's satisfaction that what we're going to have is going to be successful. We, as Walmart, partnering with GATIC, already know how successful this rollout can be in terms of what we have already been doing in those 2 other states, as I mentioned. Unless there are any questions, I think like I said, you've already heard from me. We support this legislation, continue to want to work with all the players to make sure that we reach a product that's satisfactory to you all.
Thank you, and we'll hold questions to the end of the proponents. Next up, we have on Webex, Richard Steiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just checking, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for the opportunity to appear today in support of Senate Bill 546 and share with you our vision for the safe and structured introduction of autonomous vehicles in the state of Kansas. GATIC delivers goods safely and efficiently using our fleet of light and medium duty trucks on behalf of Walmart, and we're sincerely looking forward to ensuring that the benefits of our autonomous solution can be realized by Kansans in the near term. I want to stress very strongly that for us, safety comes first. Since commencing commercial operations, we have achieved a 100% safety record across each of our operational sites. We look forward to bringing this solution to Kansas. I'd like to highlight some of the benefits that we'll be bringing to the state with our solution. These include improving safety by reducing the number of road incidents caused by distracted, inattentive, or impaired driving, establishing reliability across the supply chain by protecting against driver shortages, securing dedicated capacity and increasing product flow, essential goods and supplies to Kansans, and reducing emissions and meeting sustainability goals by improving fuel economics and reducing service and maintenance requirements. During an era in which the supply chain, I think it's fair to say, is under more pressure than ever before, GATIC's autonomous technology in partnership with Walmart provides the capability to address these challenges in Kansas and help to establish a supply chain that's safer, more sustainable, and more resilient. Our proposed rollout of vehicles in Kansas will help to make sure that the essential goods and supplies that we deliver are available efficiently, safely, and quickly with speed to Kansans. Our proposed operations in the state are poised to support significant economic growth and create some very exciting new employment opportunities in Kansas. We anticipate that our deployment in the state will create 20 to 25 new positions within 18 months of commencing operations in Kansas. In summary, we sincerely appreciate the opportunity to share this testimony today in support of Senate Bill 546. And we look forward to working very, very closely with the state of Kansas, with KDOT, and with relevant authorities to ensure that the safe, economic, and societal benefits of our autonomous solution can be realized by Kansans in the near term. Very happy to take questions at the appropriate time. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Thank you, Richard. Next up, we have via Webex, Ariel Wolf.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Let me change my video setting here. I think that's better. There you go. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I submitted testimony for the record, which I won't repeat here. So with your permission, I'll just make a couple of quick points. Try not to repeat anything that's been said. First of all, sorry I can't be there in person as there was last time, but I look forward to seeing all of you again in the near future. And I'll start just by thanking the committee and the stakeholders. I'll echo Ms. Braden's comments. This has been a process, collaborative, and we're very pleased to continue that work to make sure we get this legislation right, and we're very pleased with where it is right now. The Bill 546 in its current form is very good. It takes a holistic approach to autonomous vehicles that really positions Kansas to be a leader alongside the deployment of AV technology in neighboring states. And that it includes this technology solving issues of safety, related to driver shortage and supply chain, and other pressing matters. Just note here that in parallel, our association, the Autonomous Vehicle Industry Association, which represents more than 15 of the leading AV companies, our model legislation, which is the product of many, many years of discussions and negotiations, is near enactment in neighboring state of Oklahoma, West Virginia, just this very session. So we're pleased to see many states take the approach to try and get to a point where the technology can be deployed safely and in a timely fashion. A couple of quick points just about the current state of the bill, and Sandy noted some of them, but we're pleased to see that the text clarifies responsibility for law enforcement purposes. We're glad to work to include an advisory commission alongside, again, the changes to the text that allow for a holistic deployment that's not use case specific. There's one point I just make, though, with respect to the provision about the human driver, conventional human driver being present for 1 year. This is not a concept that appears in any other state, again, in neighboring states and elsewhere. But as an industry, we understand, working with the committee and lawmakers and stakeholders, that it's something of importance, and we want to work with everyone to get something along those lines in the bill. I would just note one thing: in its current form, the provision would have a preclusive effect for big portions of the technology. So, for example, there are zero occupant delivery vehicles, autonomous delivery vehicles, that are being deployed in the country, in Texas and Arizona. These don't have any humans inside at all. So a requirement to have a human inside, of course, would for the first year would mean that they would never be able to be deployed in Kansas. And I think that's an unintended effect of this provision. So what I think, as an association, we'd love to do is work again with stakeholders to get that language right, to retain the concept, but not have these unintended downstream or preclusive effects. That's just one example. There are a couple of others in the way it's currently constructed, and we'd love to work with the revisor and others to get that language right. So with that, I'll hold there. I think the rest is in my testimony, and happy to answer questions at the appropriate time. But thanks again to everyone for the hard work here, and we stand ready to continue to work with everyone to get this bill through. Thanks.
Thank you, Ariel, and appreciate you appearing on Webex. I do know that some of those concerns are things, or reasons we wanted the advisory council to be put in there, was so that they can address some of these issues and look at the emerging technology, because it is changing rapidly. With that, committee, we'll open it up for questions for the proponents. Do we have any questions? Senator Hawk.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think this is for Ariel. You mentioned that you represent 15 different autonomous vehicle companies. We have heard only from Walmart wanting to use the GATIC technology initially. What other companies do you think might likely want to participate in this over the next year or 2 or 5? And how different might their technology be than what GATIC has?
Well, thank you so much for the question, sir. So the Autonomous Vehicle Industry Association, we represent autonomous vehicle developers and manufacturers of technology that goes in passenger cars, in heavy trucking, and zero occupant delivery vehicles, some shuttle technology. I would want to get back to you on any specific plans, and also defer to the companies on what their plans are for deploying in the state. I think there is some thought in terms of neighboring states and how the current technology is being currently deployed in Texas and in Oklahoma on the freight side. But I know that there's a lot of excitement about getting the technology in the ride-hail context in a number of different places. Again, I'll make sure to get back to you on any specific plans and defer to those companies as they're willing to share. And hopefully does that answer your question, sir?
No, but I didn't suspect you might be able to specifically answer it, but I wanted it to be out there. And if there are others that might be wanting to come into the Kansas marketplace and deliver similar freight type things. But you did make me think of another question, if I might ask, Mr. Chairman. Does this bill now, as amended, open the door for a passenger service to start, where they would only be working for a year with a driver, and then after that year's time, they could have a passenger taxi type service, an Uber type service, or Lyft operate without a driver then?
Adam, you want to tackle that?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I believe there are provisions that hold up here. Section 5 of the bill, I think, essentially covers that point of It actually referenced the Transportation Network Company Act in Kansas. So yes, there would be, I believe, provisions in the bill that would allow for the transport of persons or goods similar to, companies that he referenced.
So it could be possible after a year's time, maybe not likely, but possible, that we could have thousands of autonomous vehicles operating in Kansas without a driver. And anybody who's a proponent could answer that question.
I'm happy to take that question, Senator. So as the revisor indicated, the legislation is intended to authorize a use case that's being deployed in the country and solving a number of different issues in the ride-hail context. I think the question of whether there'll be thousands of vehicles in terms of the way we've seen this deployed is practically speaking not how it would happen. I mean, there's a very deliberate deployment with small fleets. There's testing that needs to occur, and so it would be not as dramatic as indicated. But that is the intention of the language in the bill, to authorize in a safe way that particular use case among a number of others.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know if any of the other proponents want to respond to my question about the quantity that might potentially be on the roads and over what time period. Maybe Mike O'Neill would like to answer that.
It's Richard Steiner here, sir, from GADIC. I would be happy to respond if I may. So I can share our experience from safely deploying vehicles in a very structured fashion with Walmart in other jurisdictions. Mike O'Neill had mentioned that we've been live operating with Walmart for some years now in Arkansas and Louisiana, for example. The number of vehicles we would anticipate putting on public roads at the outset in operations with Kansas, we would be looking somewhere in the region of 5 to 10 vehicles, with potentially additional testing vehicles as well. So to Ariel's point, although the legislation is permissive in the sense that there will be room for this to scale and grow, we would be deploying in a very structured fashion at the outset to ensure that we were set up for success in the state of Kansas. So 5 to 10 vehicles is currently what we would be looking at, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I don't, this has kind of triggered a thought of mine. I know, and I get challenged in this committee as being Tesla Tom at times. I know Tesla is moving to a different kind of full self-driving, and I'm just wondering if this legislation as it's set up would allow somebody who has a Tesla, not thinking of myself, to who would determine whether or not, if this private individual who then might have the latest iteration of Tesla's full self-driving, which I don't think is there at the same level as GADIC is now, but would allow somebody to automatically, but only by submitting, I think, what did somebody say, to this law enforcement interaction plan, to say, well, I'm going to participate in this program. I just bought a new Tesla, and I'll be driving it for a year, doing my Uber or Lyft thing, and then in a year I'll be able to send my car out and do this. And certainly, if I was one of those people using my Tesla, I would have some reservation. I'm sure my neighbors might have some reservations about me sending my car out to do that while I sat at home watching TV. So that's a paranoid question, but does this legislation allow that to potentially happen as Tesla moves up to its next iteration, which is certainly different than what GADIC has going technology-wise? So could somebody speculate on that?
I don't know if there'll be speculation, but I do know that that's why we have the advisory committee set up, so they can look at it. There'll be further testimony, I think, in our neutrals of some further rules and regs that may be coming, possibly. So
Okay.
That, and that's one of the proponents want. I do have others seeking recognition.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to step aside.
Senator Cluse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure who this question will be directed towards, but anybody can respond. So of the other, we have here 44 states. Just a couple of questions back to back. And if I missed this, my apologies. This has been a lot of information that we've looked at previously and today. Who were the first couple of states would be the first question. And then from the time legislation was enacted to wheels on the ground, can you give me that time frame? I want to get a picture of, and maybe elaborate a little bit on then being able to look at the other states' legislation and enact that legislation for newer states that have just got on board. What kind of a difference in that time frame of wheels on ground, so to say?
Senator, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to respond here if that works.
Go ahead, Richard, or Ariel.
Senator, it's a great question. I think there are just briefly two tracks to think about. One is the legislative track, one is the technological track. And of course, there's a federal law component here which does not prohibit the deployment of this kind of technology. And so as we think about going back about a decade, when the technology started to be tested, that's when there's state legislators started to think about this. One of the first laws was California had a bill in 2012. Nevada also was, I think, close by there, and it's followed since. There were a couple of different approaches at first. A strict permitting approach was one that California's taken, but that was superseded as the technology showed a lot of promise with this model legislation that I referred to earlier that started to get enacted in a number of places. And it takes a holistic approach to authorize technology. Arizona, Texas, Florida, Georgia, a number of different places across the country started to enact those laws. And that sometimes happened by executive order first and then legislation. And in terms of, to respond to your question about the timeline, I think it does vary by state in terms of when the technology it goes up versus when the legislation gets enacted. But I do think it typically happens in parallel. And in some cases, it'll happen first and then legislation, as again, it depends on the posture of the state and the technology. So I would just say that some of the concepts in the proposed bill start to depart from the trend of legislation, but we're hoping that through some amendments and further work, we can get it to the point where you have the Kansas approach to AV legislation that doesn't then preclude technology from moving from state to state.
Senator Cluse.
I'm not quite sure you answered my question completely. I'm looking for that.
How long?
How long?
How long?
2 years, 3 years? Right. Whether it was executive order, legislation. I'm trying to say, you know, and then we could look at Kansas. We get this through how long before wheels on the ground? I guess I'll let you answer and then I can respond.
Does anybody wish to respond?
Right. All I'll say in response, sir, Senator, is that it's hard. It depends on the posture of that state and the community. There could be technology coming in a certain place. They could be testing first in a very limited basis. If that's what you're referring to, it could happen immediately. Building towards a framework or building towards an operational deployment, that could take a couple of years. But if there's mapping that's occurring first, the vehicles with folks in the vehicle, building towards folks out of the vehicle, that could be a couple of years process. But it can happen immediately with an autonomous vehicle that's operating as an autonomous vehicle in concert with legislation or some sort of policy executive order. So it depends on the posture, but it can happen immediately. And then it builds very deliberately and responsibly going forward. It doesn't happen, wheels on the ground within a couple of days. It builds the program. It has to.
Senator Cluse.
Okay, and part of the reason I'm bringing this up is obviously, we have the opponents to this who we haven't heard yet. I mean, we did last time, but getting past some of the apprehension, I tend to be, I like entrepreneur, I like new ideas, change brings risks, and we're talking about the other states. We hear, kind of the groundwork laid, but at the same time, I want to be sure that we're doing what's right for Kansas, what's safe for Kansas, and it seems that I'm new in this legislation. This is my second session, but it just seems like up here sometimes we try to fix things. In this case, we're not necessarily fixing things, we're launching something new, and I just want to be sure that we are taking the time to get things right, to do it right, and I appreciate the proponents. I mean, I feel like you guys are really, trying to find and do it right. I just want to stay on track because just to get something done to get it done doesn't mean it's right, and I get a little leery of this lately up here. So that's my comment.
Committee, further questions?
One online here.
Go ahead, Jeff. Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Steiner, I was just wondering, thank you. I like the holistic approach. I do share some of the layerness. I think this is a great step forward in terms of autonomous vehicle, looking at it holistically. And so I appreciate the work everyone's done on it. Is there any standard that you've seen across your industry partners where they look at, I would call it some kind of performance rating on autonomous, like we have vehicles and we give it a certain range of operation within, and you look at how long or how short it takes for them to stop, for them to make the turn, to detect something and then react to it, and then measure the performance of those autonomous vehicles in action so that we get a kind of a range. And I think GATIC probably has fantastic technology. They had some really good performance ratings, it seemed like, and they were looking at that, but we don't have anything in legislation that would necessarily look at some of the longer term capabilities or give a range of operation of some of these activities. Do you guys have any framework that you use with your industry partners, or is there some kind of an industry standard around that?
Thank you, Senator. That's an excellent question. And I'll start by saying, as I mentioned before, safety is absolutely our top priority. So in the development of our own metrics, standards, performance measures for how we are operating in a very structured and constrained use case fashion, these are developed in a very diligent fashion, and they're the types of performance standards that we be able to sort of discuss with the committee as we roll this out, sharing and including within that law enforcement interaction stakeholder engagement plan that's stipulated in the legislation. One thing I will flag, though, is, of course, given that there are different use cases across the autonomous vehicle spectrum, operating some shorter haul, some longer haul, and like GATIC in the middle mile, I think that different companies would look to slightly different approaches because of those different use cases. But the underlying theme here is all with a drive towards exemplary safety records. So I think there would certainly be commonalities across the different companies in the space.
Sure. And I appreciate that the companies would be aspiring to that. Sometimes, though, we have to put regulations or at least guidelines in place for those companies to adhere to. So appreciate the answer. Thanks. One last question. I don't doubt that you're going to have some more jobs created with different specialties inside of the space, but I have to ask the obvious question of, are we also not seeing in this exercise, in your particular example of 28 new jobs, seeing some jobs that will go away in terms of the drivers?
Thank you again for the question. So, first of all, I'll point to something which I know has been shared before in committee, which is a great gap in pending jobs, available jobs in the trucking industry, which we certainly as a company are helping to address, as are others in the space. I also want to highlight the fact certainly that with the very safe and structured inclusion of a minimum 12 months in which there would be human aboard the vehicle. So for GATIC's case, of course, we would be looking to recruit locally from Kansas, autonomous vehicle operators, safety drivers, folks to join our team on the ground to help ensure that the benefits of our solution can be realized in the state. In terms of other positions as well, we will be talking fleet operations, fleet managers. There are multiple technical positions as well, community engagement managers. This is really important as well. The way in which we want to operate in the state, of course, is in very, very close collaboration with all relevant authorities. Safety first. And so there are a number of positions which we'd be creating to ensure that that engagement was really done to the nth degree and that everybody was very, very clear on the approach that we're taking in the state. So frankly, we're excited about the creation of these new positions and look forward to bringing those opportunities to the state.
Yeah, thanks.
Committee will turn our attention to the opponents. First one up is Wendy Stark, League of Municipalities.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I apologize that I'm not able to be there in person today. Wanted to thank you for the opportunity to be able to provide testimony in opposition to Senate Bill 546. I see that a lot of work has been done on this bill, and we do appreciate that. And while we're not opposed to the concept of autonomous vehicles, we still have several concerns. And our first concern is that it's not clear about which traffic laws would apply. And it's also not clear who would be responsible for any traffic infractions. For example, in Section 6A1B and Section 9, it's not clear which traffic laws would apply or if cities could enforce those things or enforce different ordinances such as truck routes or weight limits, things like no turn at a red light, diverging diamonds that are in several cities. Being able to enforce that no turn on red is really an important, and following those laws. And really our point is that I think the intent of this bill is to not create new regulations. However, we just want to make sure that any vehicle in our cities, whether it's operated by a human or remotely, that they're all following the same traffic laws. And then our second point is it's still not clear to us who would be responsible in the event of a violation or accident. Would that, we're not sure if it's the corporate owner or if it's the remote operator or if that would be a civil penalty. And then finally, a new Section 2CA requires a driver's license when there is an operator in the vehicle, but it's not clear if there is any driver's license required for a remote operation. And so I will keep my comments short, but due to our concerns, we would encourage the committee to consider amending the bill. And I know that there are several amendments. We've talked with some folks. There are several amendments out there. We'd be happy to make sure that our concerns are addressed in those amendments. And we just believe these concerns are worth further consideration if Senate Bill 546 is to be considered by the full Senate. Thank you very much for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Wendy. We're holding questions till the end of the opponents. Next up, we have Matt Hall. Matt, thank you for your effort to make it here in person today.
Thanks for having me here today. It's really a testament to the human drivers. We could all be here safely and in person to speak. Unfortunately, usually we do have a driver up here testify on behalf of the Teamsters. We had Nick Leeson last month come and testify. Unfortunately, with the quick turnaround and the conditions, we weren't able to get a driver up here, but we wanted to offer up any member of the committee that wanted to speak to one of the drivers in your area to speak with him. We'd be more than happy to set that up. This bill, in our opinion, would open up our roads as testing grounds and would open up our citizens, our neighbors, our drivers, and our friends as test subjects for new unproven technology from any company from anywhere in the world to put 80,000 pounds going 75 miles per hour on our roads in conditions like today. I know Gaddix spoke as well, that there's a driver shortage in Kansas. From the companies we represent, there is no driver shortage. The companies that are paying good wages, have good benefits, are not reporting driver shortages that we represent. There's a wage shortage in Kansas for the companies that can't find drivers. In our opinion, this legislation is way too wide open. If we're creating the roadmap for AV in Kansas, there needs to be good guardrails and good safety conditions in there. A human fail-safe is needed, a permanent human fail-safe is needed to make sure when technology does fail, because technology does fail, there's someone behind the hand of that wheel to grab it, to make sure accidents don't happen, and to make sure our citizens are safe. The cost of us getting this legislation wrong and putting the wrong technology in our roads is way too high for us to gamble and take chances on it. With that, I'll stand for questions as needed.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate your effort to come here and give the, next we have Daniel Hinkle, Kansas Trial Lawyers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Daniel Hinkle. I'm testifying on behalf of the Kansas Trial Lawyers in opposition to SB 546. While KTLA supports the deployment of automated vehicles onto Kansas Road, it needs to be done without compromising safety and accountability. I'm going to try to avoid rehashing what others have said, but I kind of want to respond to a couple things as well. First, you heard testimony that 46 states have adopted automated vehicle legislation. I don't know where they're getting that number from. I track this for a living. There are 21 states that have a comprehensive framework that regulate the automated vehicles. 4 of those states only allow the testing of them. They do not allow the deployment of them, meaning that only 17 states have actually gone to the point of allowing what SB 546 would allow. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is that since the day the wheel was invented, drivers have been responsible for their vehicles. Who is the driver is the most salient and pressing question whenever you're drafting legislation regarding automated vehicles. And it is unclear under this bill who is the driver. I had to read it 3 times to sort of parse out exactly what's going on here. But if you follow along with me, if you look at section 2D, the bill states that the automated driving system shall be deemed to fulfill any physical act required of a conventional human driver when performing the driving task. Physical act was a weird phrasing to me until you look at the definition of a driver under Kansas law. It's section 8-14-16, where it defines the driver as a person who is in actual physical control of a vehicle. This not only means that this legislation would define an automated driving system as the driver, it implies that that system is a person under Kansas law, which must be the way the bill is intended to be read, because if you look at section 11H, which talks about law enforcement officers' ability to deliver a ticket, it says that they can deliver the traffic citation to a person charged with a traffic infraction by mailing it to the owner of an automated vehicle. Who is the person to be charged with a driving infraction here? It's the automated driving system. I hopefully don't need to reiterate this too much, but an automated driving system is not a person. It is a computer that controls a car. What purpose is there in issuing a traffic citation to a computer? What value is there in punishing a robot? Computers only do what they are told to do, what they are programmed to do. Shouldn't the people who programmed the vehicle to violate the law get the citation? If an automated driving system pilots a Class 8 tractor trailer into a school bus full of children, shouldn't the people who programmed it so that it would do that be the ones responsible? Now, it appears this bill goes a long way to avoid stating the obvious, that the manufacturer of those systems are responsible for the safe operation of the vehicle. And we actually got clarity on this on Tuesday. On Tuesday, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, NHTSA, issued a recall to the manufacturer of an automated driving system, Pony AI, because their system was unreasonably dangerous. This was a clear and unambiguous statement from the nation's top vehicle safety regulator that the manufacturer of the automated driving system is responsible for the safe operation of these vehicles. Why does this bill conspicuously avoid reaching that conclusion that the company who built and designed these systems should take responsibility for them when they're on the road? You just heard Gaddic's CEO promise that safety, safety, safety comes first. Why aren't they being held accountable for that promise? under this bill. This issue of avoiding the manufacturer's role leads to other problems, specifically with the law enforcement interaction plan requirement. It seems pointless to put that burden on the owner. Both Arizona and California have a similar law enforcement interaction plan requirement, but that requirement is placed on the manufacturer because only the manufacturer is going to be able to tell you how to communicate with a vehicle fleet specialist. Only the manufacturer can tell you the critical safety information you need to know when you're deciding to tow that vehicle or remove it from the road. There is nothing in this bill that prevents the owner from saying, I don't know, to each of these questions that needs to be submitted to KDOT. Why doesn't it ask the manufacturer to submit that information instead so that we can protect law enforcement officers? And with that, I apologize. I'm happy to answer questions.
Excellent. We'll hold questions. We have one more proponent on Webex, Blake Short, Hutton.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Blake Short. I am a civil attorney out of Wichita and a member of the Kansas Trial Lawyers Association. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to appear as an opponent today via Webex. Obviously, there's been a lot of presentations this morning. Excuse me, and I'll cut to the chase on the specific points I think are most important. We have individuals here from large businesses with a significant amount of technology and resources available who are here to tell you that safety comes first. But as has been pointed out multiple times this morning, this bill, given its current scope, will allow virtually anyone to come in and experiment with their own technology, whether it be commercial vehicles, 80,000-pound rigs, passenger rideshare vehicles, or anyone else who wants to use autonomous technology. And they're not here before you this morning to tell you whether safety comes first to them. For that reason, it's imperative that the roles in this legislation in terms of who's responsible be defined, and that we have full accountability to make sure these products are working safely and that there's accountability if needed. As was pointed out to a question that Senator Hawk posed, this legislation as drafted would allow passenger rideshare services to operate their autonomous technology. As the gentleman from Gaddick pointed out, there could be, quote, different use cases for this technology, for which there's no one here today to present and assure to you that safety comes first to them. So if we look at what are the most important things from my perspective that have not been discussed this morning, number one is the lack of sufficient insurance. Currently, as with the last version of this legislation, at which I testified as an opponent, this legislation again tracks its language to the basic Kansas statute that sets out the minimum required liability insurance coverage. As with the last statute, it keys into that language, which is $25,000 per person, $50,000 total per occurrence for bodily injury or death. We've talked about use cases in other states, including Louisiana, where Gaddick and Walmart deployed successfully. And that legislation set out for commercial autonomous vehicles a liability limit of $2 million. If that's good enough for Louisiana, it should work in Kansas. Currently, any autonomous vehicle, ride sharing, or otherwise could come in without a driver, traverse our roadways, and only be held liable to the inadequate state minimums of $25,000 per person, $50,000 per occurrence. So number one, the insurance needs to be worked out. Anyone who wants to experiment with their technology should be willing to pay for sufficient insurance. Should be a given. And second, along those lines, in terms of accountability, in the event of an unfortunate occurrence, it's very difficult under this bill to conceive how the appropriate responsible parties could be held accountable. This bill, as with the last version, tracks to the owner of the vehicle when it talks about issuing citations, as Mr. Hinkle pointed out. The owner could be virtually anybody. And the owner could be anybody who is not the true manufacturer and operator of that software. The owner could be a foreign corporation in Asia that's impossible to serve and hold accountable in our Kansas courts. So the accountability piece, perhaps the concept of having a registered agent in Kansas, those types of things would increase our ability to have accountability when needed. Those are the main points I wanted to make to avoid rehashing others' testimony. I again appreciate your time and we'll be happy to answer any questions at the conclusion. Thank you.
Committee questions for the opponents. We have just a few minutes. The chair is waiting outside to come in the room. A lot of good things to consider have been presented. Really appreciate that, committee. We will be meeting Monday morning. We'll get the calendar out. We're going to apologies to the neutrals. I know some of these issues will be addressed in Ed Klump's and Secretary Lorenz's testimony, but we are out of time. With that, we're adjourned. Once again, we'll continue the hearing on Monday.